Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David.
And hello, Fabrice.
Hello,
Yay.
David. Hello, Rhonda.
Hi, Fabrice. Yay that you're back.
Well, so happy to be back. It's so nice to see you guys, both of you. We had briefly talked about doing this remotely over Zoom, but I just wanted to see you guys
I know, me too.
in the flesh.
Much more fun.
I'm so happy.
And Fabrice, you have some exciting and joyous news to share with us.
But we have to say who Fabrice is, because
Oh, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yes.
Oh, yes.
the
Some
fans
people
know
may have
Fabrice.
just picked up the podcast.
People have forgotten, or
Yes.
maybe they've just recently started listening.
Yeah. Fabrice is a dear friend, esteemed colleague, and the founder and originator and creator of the Feeling Good podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Fabrice's
I'm sorry,
brilliant idea.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty for having started this whole thing.
It was your brilliant idea, and you
Yeah.
had the technological skills to get it going.
Well, maybe we can remind people of how this started.
Yeah.
I love that.
That might be a good idea. It was back in 2000 and... Well, this has been going on for 3 years, right?
Something like that. We've got this.
So early
the data,
2016. So
yeah.
2016, we were hiking, and it was one of those days where nobody else showed up for some reason, and so it was just you and me, David and I, and I had been thinking about the fact that David has this ebook that he sells to the people who study with him. And this is pretty much the only, I mean, not quite, but the main clinical manual for the team CBT. And I said, I know you have a lot of general public books, but it'd be good to publish this. And, David is always very understated when he doesn't want to do something, but it was pretty clear that he foresaw that as a lot of work for not much return. So I saw that this was maybe not something in the cards. And I said, well, I have another idea. We could do a podcast. And I think David had never heard the term before.
Yeah, right.
So I had to explain to him what a podcast was. And
Is that like a cell phone or something?
yeah, exactly. Well, that's where it came from, the iPod.
Oh.
And so the iPod gave the name to the podcast.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't know that. How interesting.
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure, but I think that's where it came from.
Wow.
Because you could take the broadcast with you in your iPod.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, it's not going to be that difficult. I'll do the technical stuff, and I'll just interview you, and we'll talk about all the topics that are mentioned in the ebook. Now it's gone way beyond that, but it was a way for people to have a reference who don't have access to the ebook or the Tuesday group or David's teachings. And so that was, and this became popular not just only for clinicians, but for the vast general public who really has enjoyed the podcast.
And did we do the survey when you and I were working together? Was that when Rhonda had taken over as a
Which
host?
survey?
When we did
Yeah,
the survey
we did a
of
survey,
our fans to find out who they were and what they were looking for. The thing I liked about it, it was fun and easy, and it still is. But you would show up at the house, and we'd sit down. I just have a few questions or a couple notes. There wasn't much preparation for a podcast. In fact, I looked at my first show notes. It was about 3 sentences, and we would just rap about stuff, and it was just so much fun, really.
Yes. It's been quite a ride for me.
Yeah, and it was really fun to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
It was always really fun to listen to.
And what's it like for you at Rhonda now?
Well, we still are just having topics and wrapping. It was very nerve-wracking in the beginning, to be perfectly honest, Fabrice, because you have very big shoes to fulfill, and there's a part of me that wondered, why did David ask me to do this? So we did some personal work on that, and that was really helpful. And it's actually been really fun. Learning the technology part, since I don't have the background you did, was really challenging. And luckily my son is in the broadcast field, so I was constantly calling him up, crying and asking him to help me, when finally he just said, look, I'll take over all the technological part.
That was so nice of him.
And then it became just a complete joy.
And I get emails about you every week still, because look, a lot of people are just starting on the podcast. So to them, it's Fabrice, and I get a lot of, wonderful comments about Fabrice.
Yeah, because, a lot of people start from episode 1.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, they don't know you came along at around 1:30?
Yeah,
thereabouts.
there, yeah.
Do you remember how many downloads we had when we started out the first month or two? Maybe we didn't even know how to count.
We didn't have statistics then, because we moved to Libsyn only around episode like 25 or something.
Yeah, and I think they said that there were they know how many podcasts there were before.
Uh-huh.
They called them some kind of podcasts, and then all the new podcasts.
Yeah.
But I think it was probably like 25,000 or something that we had done total in the months before we went to the new syndication.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go well over 100,000 again this month, and we've done that for that'll be I think the third or fourth month in a row.
Yeah. So you're having a big impact on people around the world.
It's really nice. When I did the Atlanta workshop, the intensive. It's the first time I've done an intensive in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it was a nice attendance for an intensive. There were like 104 people, which is really good for a 4-day workshop, almost the same as South San Francisco. And when I said, how many of you are podcast fans, 40% of the hands went up.
Wow.
People were there from all over the world because of the Feeling Good podcast. It's the first time there's been a significant audience because of the podcasts.
Yeah, so you can tell. That's great.
But we miss you, and it's just so good to see you. And you've got all kinds of new news, and we want to hear about the fascinating research you're doing. But tell us about the exciting news.
So I got married last October.
Wow.
Congratulations.
So awesome.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I'm very happy about this. This is, a decision that I know is 100% right.
Yay.
So I feel very good about it.
Fantastic.
That is so neat to hear. And then you're living half-time up in beautiful Northern California, like a couple hours north of here?
Well, for people who don't even know the geography of this region, who actually call Murrieta Studios part of Northern California. So I'm half-time in Oakland and half-time in a region called the Russian River, which made the news actually around the world lately because of the fires. And a little anecdote, we got married on October 26th up in the Russian River in the woods. And that very same day, they evacuated the whole region. So we had to go back to Oakland. So that was memorable.
Did you know you were about to be evacuated when you were getting married?
No idea. No idea. We knew that the air was smoky, and some people were not sure they were going to come for the ceremony. But eventually everyone showed up, and we had the ceremony. We made a fondue, and then they cut off the power.
Wow.
So we just finished our fondue and then went back to the Bay Area.
Yeah. Sweet. That'll be a good story to tell
it's a good
the rest of your life.
Well, welcome back. This is a real treat. And you promised to tell us a little bit about some of this mind-boggling research you've been doing.
Well, not just that I've been doing. I mean, I'm not really a researcher. I was involved in one of the research projects, probably the one that's the most advanced now in terms of how close it is to becoming an approved modality. So, I'm sure that you'll put this in the title of the podcast, but one of the new tools coming up in psychotherapy is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
Which is a sexy and exciting
It is very sexy and exciting, and especially because what got me involved in that was I read about the preliminary results, and at the time they were just beginning the phase 2 trial, and it was mind-boggling because they were recruiting people who had treatment-resistant PTSD.
So you're recruiting clients or patients?
Participants. This is a study. The study was and still is led by Dr. Michael Mithofer, and also working with his wife Annie.
You'll have to send me an email with those names.
Yeah, I will give you. You'll have all this for the show notes, The very first study had I don't have that many notes here, but about 80 participants.
Oh, it's a pretty big study.
That's big.
They had a grant, I presume.
So the way this is funded, this is a little bit different than most drug research or even psychotherapy research. The drug companies are not interested in this because number one, the substances for the most part are not patentable. The patent has run out, or it's a natural compound. But unlike something like an SSRI, which you have to take every single day, forever, for the end of your life, pretty much, the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, you take maybe 3 pills, and you're done.
All at the same time, or 3?
No.
3 times.
There's like 3 sessions. At least that's the way the research is conducted. It seems to be like optimal.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to sell 3 pills per patient, it's not very interesting for a drug company.
Yeah.
So not a lot of money coming from there. The funding is done by nonprofits. The one that funds this particular study, which uses MDMA as the substance and treats PTSD, is funded by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Tell us what MDMA is.
Oh, MDMA, it stands for 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine.
Is that the same as the party drug that makes everyone in real love mood?
Yes.
Ecstasy.
So this is the
Ecstasy.
the active component that's in ecstasy.
Yeah.
But I never use the term ecstasy because when you buy a street drug, you don't know what's in it.
Oh yeah, right.
So the MDMA that's used for the research study is produced by a bona fide licensed laboratory with perfect titration.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So when I saw
just a quick question: is this a psychedelic in the sense of like LSD or magic mushrooms, or is it more of a high? Or...
Okay, so that's a very good question. You guys may have heard of the author Michael Pollan.
Yes.
He wrote a book last year called How to Change Your Mind.
Oh,
yes,
that's a good title.
Where he talked about his taking LSD, though, didn't he? Was it LSD?
No, he didn't take LSD. He took psilocybin mushrooms.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
And in the beginning of the book, he explains that he decided to look into psychedelics, and he asked a number of the people who study the field, and he decided the MDMA was not considered psychedelic.
Oh.
Some people kind of differ in opinion. The fact is that MDMA has been called an empathogen, meaning that it opens your heart.
Oh yeah,
there's not a lot of visuals or any distortion in the perceptions.
Empathogen, I love that word.
Yeah. Some people also say entactogen. I don't know where that comes from. But so he didn't put it in there, and it's true that some people say it's not a classic psychedelic because it doesn't really distort your perception or even your sense of self, but it really opens you to your emotions. You're willing to feel the emotions. There's people who are kind of restrained and really hold things in are more able to let things out.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. And also it makes you more loving toward others.
Yes.
More compassionate.
Yes. So when they do this with PTSD victims, what happens is that PTSD victims tend to have a really difficult time evoking or even just thinking about their trauma, because the emotion that comes out are just too overwhelming. With MDMA, this is more sustainable. They're willing to revisit the trauma without feeling flooded.
Yeah.
And
it's easier for them to do flooding, to remember the trauma and to experience those things, whereas normally they might tend to avoid them because they're so upsetting, and then avoidance is the cause of all anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it allows you to work around the avoidance.
Yeah.
And so the results from the phase 3 trial came out where a third of the participants no longer had diagnosable PTSD, which persisted to 6 months after the trial.
This is the third trial, did you say, that a third of the participants after their 3 treatments no longer had symptoms of diagnosable PTSD?
Yeah, so this was a FDA-approved phase 2 drug trial.
Oh, the phase 2 is what we're talking about, yeah.
Did you say after phase 2 or after phase 3? 1/3 had...
After phase 2.
After phase 2, okay.
So there's a difference between the phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2 was using different dosages, including some really low doses. But phase 3 has an actual placebo, non-active placebo.
I see.
And that will tell us whether the actual therapy that's given is what percentage of that is the active component, and what percentage.
Both patients will get the therapy, but
yes.
Half of them randomly will get the MDMA.
Exactly. So there's always been a problem with psychedelic clinical trials, because the moment you get the placebo, it's the placebo.
Yeah.
There's no hiding it, and the experimenter knows it too.
Yeah.
So it's really hard, almost impossible to do double blind or even single blind.
Yeah. Well, you do your best, right?
Yeah, and that's why the phase 2 was done using low doses and high doses.
Oh, I see. That's a good one. Was the high dose better?
Well, it's interesting because they tried different dosages, and they found that they tried to do like up to 200 milligrams, and they found that actually a medium dose was best, probably because you don't get lost in the trip. You're more interacting with the therapist.
Although sometimes you get chance results too, and then an interpretation is put on if you have several different cells.
Yes, and so this is indicative. You cannot say for sure the medium dose is the best, but they chose to keep that dosage for the phase 3 because that was the most promising.
Yeah, that's good.
So right now, let me see.
Fabrice, can I ask you a question about the placebo?
Yes.
You said MDMA, there's no visual hallucinations, and it's more that people are willing to feel their emotions.
Yeah.
So why would they know that they're given a placebo?
Well, if you have ever taken MDMA, you know when it's active. There's no mistaking.
It's a powerful party drug.
Now, if you've never done it, you may feel like, well.
I mean, couldn't you kind of imagine that you're feeling your emotions better too?
You could.
But it's not something that's easily faked,
It's not easily faked.
Like, well, I've never had it, but it's like you're getting stoned.
Okay.
Or high or different. It's not a subtle thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
it's not particularly subtle. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So
it's like having a study to have the effect of an elephant step on your foot. And then half the patients, you'll have an ant step on your foot. And you can see the difference.
Right.
But it's still
that makes sense.
highly, highly important to do this kind of research and to do the best one can. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And so in the phase 2, the other 2/3 who were still diagnosable had also clinically significant decreases in their PTSD symptoms.
Wow, that's awesome. All 2/3?
All of them, yes.
Wow.
They've been using the CAPS, the clinician-assisted PTSD scale, clinician-administered PTSD scale, to determine whether they had PTSD. The average score for people who came in was about 75.
From 0 to what?
I think the top is like 120 or something. The VA considers that if you're over 50, you're diagnosable.
So 75 would be pretty severe.
Pretty severe. And so 1/3 of people were below 50 and remained that way for at least 6 months when they did the follow-up.
Wow.
Not to make this too detailed, but we assume our listeners know what PTSD is because you hear it in the news all the time. But I can help with this too. Just tell them what PTSD is.
Well,
the
acronym stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and PTSD is something that happens to you when you have a traumatic event where you feel like you're in danger or imminent danger, or you know of someone who is in danger, or you witness it. And not everyone gets it after a trauma, but some people, for some reason, are more susceptible to it. And for a number of people, like people who've been in combat, they've had multiple exposure to trauma, or people with serial abuse or sexual abuse. I mean, it's pretty debilitating. The symptoms really show up in constant anxiety, nightmares, flashbacks of the trauma. And a flashback is not like a memory. You feel like you're reliving the event as if it's happening now. And people are really feeling scared of that happening, and they take all kinds of steps to avoid it. If it's a combat veteran who was shot at by a sniper in a dark alley, will avoid all, dark areas, for example,
or they might have a really strong startle response.
Yes, a startle response, like if a
loud sounds.
Car backfires in the
like
distance.
Our cat Misty, when she hears this, she was feral, another feral kitten we have, and she gets easily startled. And then there's also, they'll always be depressed, almost always be depressed at the same time. That's another symptom of PTSD. And they have anhedonia, which is a symptom of depression, but a lack of pleasure or satisfaction in life. And I did when I was developing the different scales that I use that you're familiar with, and I developed a positive feeling scale. I think there were 8 5-item positive scales, like happiness, feeling loved or cared about, playfulness, productivity, things like that. So I think there were then 40 questions each with the 5-item, not at all to a lot, and 0 was not at all, and a lot was 4 points. So the highest score on the scale would have been like 80.
Yeah.
And many of and I tested it on a group of veterans at the Atlanta VA in the PTSD program there, and most of them had 0s on the test.
Yeah,
it was hard to believe.
Yeah, when you have such symptoms, and I have a client with really severe PTSD symptoms, happiness is not even in the cards.
Yeah,
having emotions is just even too scary. No matter what emotion, it's just like everything gets stuffed down. And it's hard to live that way.
Great clinical description. So tell us more about your research and also kind of what you did, what it was like treating them, what you did in the treatment protocols. Anything you think that would interest our listeners, because it all sounds fascinating.
My involvement was not directly hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
What they did is they had what they called adherence raters. All the sessions were videotaped.
Oh, I see.
And they had people like me who would watch the entire session.
Oh.
And make sure that the experimenters adhered to the protocol.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
This was one of the reasons why the FDA was so willing to let them go from phase 2 to phase 3, because they could more or less guarantee that all the experimenters were applying the same treatment to all the participants. Often when you do outcome studies, the treatment happens between closed doors, and
who knows what's happening there.
You assume that they're following the protocol, but
they're not.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows what's happening behind closed doors?
Yeah. So that's
and having a protocol is kind of appealing too, because then you can theoretically train people to do these specific things.
Exactly. So I really like that. And I'm very excited that this is now in phase 3. They are doing the first half of phase 3 now with 100 participants, and the second half will be another 100 participants. And that's in the US only. They are also doing multi-sites outside of the US.
That's really great.
Yeah.
What did you see, without betraying confidentiality, but the kinds of things that they're doing in the treatment with the PTSD individuals, whether or not they're getting the MDMA? What does the therapy consist of?
So the therapy is somewhat non-directive, something that you might equate to motivational interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're including a little bit more of what's called internal family systems in there, where they're pointing to the way we talk in terms of parts. Like, say, part of me would like this, part of me would like that. They isolate those parts and say, well, tell me about that part of you. And so it's all about eliciting the thoughts of the participants as they're under the influence of MDMA. There's also a sense that there's an inner intelligence to the participant. So when this is facilitated by the drug, to really let them go where they think is the right place to go. Part of the protocol is to ask about the traumatic event if the participant doesn't bring it up. But in my experience watching those sessions, they almost always do.
What are the different parts that they might have? What does that refer to?
Well, that goes more into the IFS protocol, which is not really the topic of this podcast, but briefly, parts are management processes that develop along our development. So let's say I'm a kind of an exuberant child, and I get the message from my parents that it's just not okay. I'm going to develop like a good boy part that's going to get approval from the parents, but it's going to stuff down all this energy I have inside. And so, one part would be like the good boy part. And I carry this into my adulthood because I never question this way of managing my own internal emotions.
I had a patient once, and his wife called him Gubby.
Uh-huh.
For good boy.
Oh, yeah.
But in that case, it was kind of an angry term because, he was too nice in a way.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, Fabrice, you're talking about, and tell me if this is accurate, people identifying different parts of themselves and using this to integrate all of them together?
Yeah, so the ultimate goal is an integration. And I invite people to look into internal family systems if they're interested in that modality. I use that in my practice myself. I have some clients who respond really well to it because it allows them to disidentify with a particular behavior. It's like, I'm not my behavior.
Right.
And that's really helpful for people.
Kind of like low-level multiple personality disorder or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, some people say we all have multiple personalities.
Yeah, well, I've been noticing that lately too.
Yeah.
Like when I'm at Stanford, I don't, my serial killer side doesn't come out.
Exactly, yeah. You wear a different hat, right? And your shoplifting part doesn't come up either.
Right.
So that's this particular part of the research, and people may wonder, well, MDMA, it's not really a psychedelic. What can you tell us about the psychedelics themselves? The classic psychedelics are psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD, mescaline. Those are the better known ones.
Ayahuasca. What is ayahuasca?
So ayahuasca. So DMT is
dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Yeah.
Dimethyltryptamine.
That's like a 30-minute LSD trip.
Well, so DMT is interesting because DMT is a substance we have in our bodies.
Oh.
It's resident in our body. You can actually extract DMT from your bloodstream.
Oh.
But if you take DMT, if you ingest it, it's going to be broken down by your digestive tract, and so you cannot eat it. But ayahuasca is something you drink. It's a brew that's was created in the South American rainforest. And ayahuasca is actually a vine that contains an MAO inhibitor. You can put this in the show notes. I'm not going to explain what it is, but it allows the DMT in the other vine, the other plant, in the ayahuasca, to be ingested. So essentially, it blocks the enzyme so that the DMT can go into the bloodstream.
Oh, the DMT would be broken down by
Otherwise, it would be
monoamine
broken
oxidase
down, yes.
in the GI tract, and
Yes.
so it wouldn't go into the bloodstream.
Yes.
But the ayahuasca blocks the enzyme that breaks down
Exactly. Yes.
the psychedelic substance of DMT.
Exactly.
And then it goes into the bloodstream in much larger quantities than it would naturally be there, and goes into the brain.
Yeah.
And has a kind of an LSD serotonin type effect, but much
Exactly.
slower than quicker than LSD.
Well, yes. So in terms of duration, DMT is probably one of the shorter ones.
Yeah.
Then mescaline and psilocybin are a bit longer, 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah.
And LSD, full dose, will carry you for 12 to 14 hours.
Yeah.
And what about ayahuasca?
So ayahuasca is a DMT-like. Now ayahuasca in the ceremonies, they take boosters periodically. So the duration is longer because they drink the ayahuasca throughout the ceremony.
Uh-huh.
We had someone from our group who went to South America and took the ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And had a fabulous experience, and then he went down and repeated it some months later, and had an absolutely horrific experience that he's been struggling with ever since.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That a lot of people have had kind of scary experiences.
Yes, so it's rather rare, but DMT has this property that when you trip on DMT, including ayahuasca, you tend to have this encounter with aliens or some spiritual beings, or disincarnate entities.
Yeah.
And for some people, that can lead them to freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be ready for that.
Have you taken that ayahuasca?
A long time ago. It didn't do anything for me, but
were you in South America?
No, I did it in California.
Oh, cool.
But Fabrice, are you an adherence rater with any of the other?
No. So the other ones I've been following from a distance, but with a lot of interest, because So MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD is in phase 3. None of the other ones are in phase 3 yet. So this particular research study is likely to be approved fairly soon, I hope in 2021, maybe a little bit
that's
later.
by the federal government?
Yes, the FDA is actually overseeing that clinical trial.
Oh.
If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, which is an official site where you can look for all the clinical trial, there's right now 15 trials that show up using MDMA for this or that.
Wow.
Cool.
Including the one I just cited. I think there's something really promising in there where they are treating PTSD victims and their partner.
Yes.
And both partners are taking the drug.
And are they doing it together?
And they're doing it together.
In the
and
same session with the same therapist?
Yes. So I don't know the details yet, but I think this is really promising for couples therapy. Because that breaks down the barriers instead of, being at each other's throat during the session.
Now, what drug is that for the couples? What drug?
MDMA.
Oh, yeah, that would
Still
be the
MDMA.
one for that.
Yeah.
Let me bring you back to your MDMA research, although the psilocybin and all that is interesting because, as you know, when I was a medical student, it was legal, LSD, Sandoz pure,
yes,
and we could get it. And I took it on a number of occasions, and I was really sad when the government and culture demonized it because I felt at least these are drugs that do something. And these are drugs that should be researched as opposed to antidepressants and things, and a lot of drugs that really don't do anything, at least don't do anything other than a placebo effect. And these drugs, whether they're going to be helpful or hurtful or somewhere in between, at least they're telling us something amazing about the human brain and how the human brain works. And, the experiences I had were just astonishing, is the only way to put it.
Absolutely. What I feel is really sad is we lost decades of research.
Yeah, that's right.
Because this could have been studied since the 60s, and right now we would be much farther along.
Yeah, right.
But even the research that was done in the 60s is being discarded now because, some of it was just thrown away, literally thrown away.
Oh, yeah.
But even what's left is only usable as anecdotal evidence because we didn't have back then the research criteria that we have now.
That's right. If you look through the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology for research articles from the 1960s, they look like high school essays.
Yeah.
They're just really of low scientific quality. One other thing I wanted to ask you, though, my second question was that tell us what happens then when the veterans are talking about their experiences, say, with the MDMA. That it's like exposure and a lot of crying and emoting and that type of thing?
Yeah, so let me describe how a session goes very briefly. The client arrives in the morning, let's say 9:30, and then somebody shows up with the dose, which is not administered by the therapist. But
does the therapist have to be a medical doctor?
No, they don't have to be. But when this is proved, the person who prescribes the drug has to be a medical doctor. Mm-hmm. So whatever clinic does this needs to have an MD consulting or on site.
Okay.
So somebody brings the dose and they take the dose and they lie back with eye shades on and headphones. And they listen to music that is meant to bring you through different emotional states. It starts with some soft music, and then it gets more loud, and it varies in its quality.
That's just so fascinating that music is involved to create emotion within the person.
Absolutely. The music, what the music does is kind of moves your state of mind from calm to excited to wistful and it brings you to different parts of your memory, including the traumatic memory.
Oh, that's cool.
And so the drug takes effect in between 25 to 45 minutes, depending on the person. after about 45 minutes, the person is asked if it really is not doing much for them, if they want a booster. A lot of people accept to take the booster.
So after 45 minutes around, they'll ask if they want a booster?
Yes. And the amount given is depending on the weight of the person. Mm-hmm. So the first dose is anywhere between 40 and 80 milligrams. If I remember, no, sorry, 80. Don't quote me on this.
Whatever. It doesn't matter.
We'll put that in the show notes. And then the second dose is about half of that.
Oh, yeah.
So after, about an hour, where typically the participant has been silent. Some get really talkative and they come out of their, eye shades and they start talking to the therapist. But a lot of people just stay in the experience. And so the therapist will say, they'll usually, because they take the blood pressure throughout the study.
Oh, they do?
So under the guise of saying, well, we need to take your blood pressure, they'll say, would you like to share about what's going on for you? And so they go into a more interactive mode.
Oh, yeah.
And that goes on for, however long they need to talk. And then they go back for another 20 minutes. And so they oscillate between going inward and then sharing about the experience. And
it sounds like it's fairly easy for the therapist, but then they'd also have to know, kind of like 5 secrets of effective communication to when the person begins to talk. So they're stroking and inquiry and feeling empathy and disarming and encourage them to continue talking.
Yeah, and in fact, if you watch one of those sessions, I think some of them have been made public where the participant agreed to it. So you may be able to see a snippet of that, and you'll see that what the therapists do. This is 2 therapists, by the way. There's always 2 people in the room because it lasts for 8 hours. They have to relieve each other and take breaks. So but there's always one person present.
It's going to be expensive in a private practice.
That's another story. But insurance companies pay for 28-day rehabs.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to be cheaper than rehab. So, by the way, they're also doing studies on, smoking cessation, alcohol addiction, cocaine addiction, and that too is showing a lot of promises. They're using psilocybin for this mostly, and that seems to have been quite effective.
Do they measure the symptoms of the patients? How are you feeling right now, before and after the session, like what we do in team?
Not that. No, they do. They administer the CAPS, the PTSD scale, before the first session. Then after the second and after the third. So the CAPS
is it worded? How are you feeling right now, or how have you been feeling over the past week, or?
I don't know if you've seen the CAPS, but it asks questions like, I don't know if I can pull it up quickly enough here, but they don't do a measurement of their mood until the whole treatment is finished.
Do they do that at the beginning also?
Beginning and then at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more the way it goes.
Yeah.
I was playing with my phone to get the ding to stop, so I might have missed it, but it sounds like the clinician doesn't say much to the patient. Am I getting that incorrect?
Oh, no, they keep drawing them out.
Oh, they do. They keep drawing them out.
Yeah.
Like using 5 secrets.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Wants to talk about what they're experiencing.
See, here's an example of question in the CAPS. In the past week, have there been times when you suddenly acted or felt as if your traumatic event was actually happening again? So they're asking about flashbacks.
So they're measuring over the past week as opposed to changes in feelings from the start to the end of the treatment session, the experience.
Yeah.
But they do measure the how they're feeling in the here and now. we don't know if that's at the beginning and end of treatment, so that they can measure the change resulting from the treatment.
The end of the session, because the drug has worn off, is much more like a dialogue, and so you get a sense about how the patient is feeling, because they're asking a lot of questions then, but it's not structured.
Right. I want to ask one question, and then see what messages you want to leave with people, because this has been most fascinating. I had a young fellow who talked to one of the psychopharmacologists at Stanford, I believe, about MDMA, because he loved to take it and felt it had just wonderful antidepressant effects for him. And I think he was advised that it can cause brain damage and not to take it more often than every 3 months. Now, that was not referring to a protocol where you take small measured doses, for 3, but like people are using it like kind of on a party drug type of thing. That's my memory of it. Now, don't quote me on that, but
so MDMA,
because it's an amphetamine.
Yeah, MDMA has an amphetamine component, not as strong as amphetamine or methamphetamine, but it does have a stimulant effect. And so it is not recommended for people.
So amphetamines aren't added to it. It's just that it has a component of.
If you look at the molecule, if you take the amphetamine molecule and you add a methyl, anyway, you add a radical to it, it changes the molecule, which makes a big difference, but it still has this amphetamine component in it. And so it's not recommended for people who have a heart condition.
Oh, okay.
The other thing is, because right now, unless you're under a clinical trial, it is not a legal drug. It's still under Schedule 1.
Yeah.
Therefore, you cannot obtain it in a legal way unless you go to maybe the Netherlands or Jamaica, where those drugs are legal. But otherwise, you would have to get this as a street drug. And when you do that, you're taking your life in your own hands, because you don't know what you're getting.
I don't recall if it was ketamine he was asking about, and say don't take it more than once every 3 months, or Molly, MDMA. I think it was MDMA, but it could have been the other one. I'm not sure.
So MDMA is not benign on the body.
Yeah.
It can increase.
There are amphetamines.
Yes, it can increase your blood pressure. It can create heart arrhythmias.
Yeah.
So the dose has to be very carefully monitored.
But they give Adderall, which is street dexedrine. That's all it is. They give that stuff out like candy.
Yes, I know. But at least you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Because it's being produced by a laboratory.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're really emphasizing, Fabrice, not to take this from a street drug and experiment in your kitchen.
Yes.
Because you're putting your life in your own hands.
So I like to also remind our listeners that what we're talking about here is not a drug treatment. It's psychotherapy assisted by a drug experience.
That's right. Yeah, that's
so
great.
The people who are in those different studies are taking those drugs under the supervision of one, or most of the time 2 therapists at all times.
Well, in my opinion, you're doing visionary and awesome work, and to be applauded. And, I've been wanting to see this kind of research for 40 years.
Well, I can't wait for the day when, MDMA or psychedelic psychotherapy is under the M of methods.
Yes, that's right.
Team.
Me too.
That's right. Do you know anyone we can refer people to when that happens? Someone maybe with quite a bit of experience in this area.
I think I might.
Well, so you listeners, when you're ready for your psychedelic treatment or your MDMA treatment, we'll make sure we put your email in the show notes again.
But there are a few psychiatrists. There are a few team psychiatrists who are also interested and have been studying this.
So one quick word about ketamine, because ketamine occupies a very separate niche in this field. Ketamine is a legal drug that has been used for years as an anesthetic, and it has some really good properties as an anesthetic. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. It's very quick in its action, and it's very quick to come out of it. But the dosages are used for anesthesia are much higher than the dosage are now being used in ketamine clinic for treatment of depression. So now they're using this as a mild psychedelic to treat depression. Because it's legal, all kinds of clinics are popping out with an MD at their head.
I even saw them being advertised on TV now.
Yeah, and
you saw ketamine advertised on TV?
Yeah, clinics. They're probably very costly.
Wow.
So the thing is, unlike those research studies that I just mentioned, the main protocol is like this. They put you into a room, kind of like one of those chemo rooms.
Yeah.
They put an IV in your arm, and they increase the dosage over the course of about 30 minutes, and then for another 40 minutes they flush it out of your system, and you have a nurse who comes and check in on you every few minutes, but that's about it. There's no therapy involved. And even though they quote unquote recommend that you work with your therapist outside of those sessions, they found that this often has a antidepressive effect that lasts about 6 weeks. Not for everyone, but some people have some psychedelic experiences that they don't know how to process because the environment is not set up for that.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I saw an article, I don't know if it was valid, I got recently some kind of bad outcomes from ketamine, including suicides that have been not reported by the agencies that are administering it. I don't know if it was just a rabble-rousing article or a valid criticism. I haven't read it in detail, but I think we have to be a little cautious initially, applaud new directions, but like yourself, we get good researchers looking with a critical eye.
Yeah, I mean, don't jump into this without looking. You have to be really careful. I mean, you can join a clinical trial. In fact, there's an article that I'll give you a link to that explains what you can do if you want to have an experience like this legally.
Awesome, thank you. We'll put that in the show
Fabrice,
notes. We've got to wrap this pretty quick.
Yeah, just one more question. So now you're doing the adherence compliance. Are you going to move into the role of therapist?
Well, I wanted to do this. It so happens that they're not doing training right now for those studies, and I haven't been able to get into the training. The training itself actually is even quite expensive.
You pay for the training?
Well,
who charges? Who's getting the money?
So there are two places right now that do training. There's MAPS itself that trains its experimenters, and the school in San Francisco, CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, has a training program that trains therapists, people in a certificate in psychedelics assisted psychotherapy.
Oh, that's new.
And they're using a similar protocol to what MAPS does, so it's the same training essentially.
Yeah.
The difference is that MAPS actually gives their trainees an actual experience with the drug, where CIIS doesn't do it, because again, it's not legal.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for today. It's been both, for me, personally touching and wonderful to see you again and to work with you again. It's really, really wonderful. But also, from the point of view of our listeners, you've just given us a wealth of fascinating and important and fun information today. It's really been a delight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
You're
you
welcome.
so much, Fabrice.
It was so nice to be back in here. Oh, and I have an announcement. Sorry, I almost forgot. So I think that I may have mentioned this when I left the hosting of this podcast, but I'm about to host my own podcast.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. Yes. In French?
Well, I found out that this will have to come a little bit later because I'm going to do the one in English first.
Oh, okay.
And then I'll do a French version of that afterwards.
What's the theme and title of your podcast? Then send us, the information so we can link to you and promote you.
It's called Peace at Last.
Okay.
And you can find out more about it at peaceatlast.us.
Okay.
The launch date is planned for February 6th. I think
fabulous.
This should be
similar to the time this will come out.
Hopefully, soon after this.
So if they want to hear the podcast, they go again to the link. We'll put it in the show notes, but say it again because not everyone gets the show notes. peaceatlast.us. And is this a political thing about political peace or
No, actually, this is
inner peace.
This is about
frozen peace,
drawing world peace. It's about taking the research, including the research I just cited today, but all research past and present in psychology, plus the wisdom that has been drawn from spiritual traditions and how we can use that knowledge to help ourselves be more at peace.
It's beautiful. We were talking about that at the end of the last podcast, the spiritual dimension. That should be extremely fascinating and popular because everyone loves psychology, everyone loves spirituality, and the linking between the two of them is an awesome area.
I think that those centuries-old traditions have a lot to bring to what we're doing today.
Right.
I mean, if you take the mushrooms, for example, this is a tradition that's been used in tribes and and indigenous populations for a long time.
Yeah.
And only now are we beginning to use it for scientific and Western purposes, hopefully in a respectful manner. So it's the same for other spiritual technologies. I know you like Buddhism. And Buddhism is really about the finding out that we have no self.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, here's some info for you. We got to get out of here. But my new book is being edited. It's going to come out in September, Feeling Great. And I had a chapter in there on there's several chapters on yourself can't be judged. And then a chapter on there's actually is no self.
Right.
But people became so upset when they read it that they demanded I remove it from the book.
People? What people?
Everyone who read the book practically. They were just outraged and confused, and how can there be no self?
All right, so send those people to have a psychedelic experience because
I know.
What psychedelics do is they show you that you have no self, and you go, oh, now I get it.
Yeah, it's just something that you see. You suddenly see. It's not that big a deal because once you see it, there's nothing to see. But it is a relief because so much suffering comes from thinking you have a self that's not good enough.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah, I love hearing that. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Fabrice. Yeah.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'm going to give you a hug after.
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
And thank you guys for listening. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.